Vinta Kayangan is a super dark teal ink. If you like these super dark inks, you are going to love this one. It is amazing to really look at. Now, in general, I'm going to say that we see no color shifting as we're changing paper, and we, for how dark it is, get no shading. I am going to say that on non-fountain pen friendly paper, it can be a little bit more aggressive at times. It's the aggressive Chihuahua kind of aggressive. It's there. It's a pain in the neck, but it's not going to be the end of the world. Now, what it really comes down to is when I'm looking at this, do I think that I would like a bottle of it? And you know what? I probably would like a bottle of it, and I probably would use the crap out of it pretty quickly. This is certainly on my radar for when it gets time to buy more bottles of ink, which I haven't needed to do a whole lot. You know, it's one of those things about looking at samples all the time.
The pen for today is a Hero 7045. And now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
Looking at the Clairfontaine, you get to see just how wildly dark this ink is. I want to call it almost at a black, but I can tell without a doubt that it is not. This is a super, super dark teal ink that looks great. It has no feathering. It has no spread. It has no shading. And in this case, I think that having no shading for the really standout tone that we're getting on the page is an acceptable thing. It's doing wonders for my writing. It makes my writing, which is generally crap, look a little bit nicer, especially when you're having a bad writing day. Looking at the back of the page between the wiggling fingers, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
Vinta makes more than just one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks from Vinta. Here is Vinta Pink Sands Shimmering Santa Cruz.
Here is Vinta Mascara. Here is Vinta Romblon. Here is Vinta Sandugo.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather and it does not spread. It does not shade. It does stand out from the page, really grabbing your attention. Very dark lines, staying a super dark teal. If someone were to not realize it, they might think you have just kind of an odd kind of green or black, but they might not be able to tell. It's just that it's so dark. It's great in what's happening. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather it, it does not spread, it does not shade. We use this paper to be able to see if it's going to change the tone of the ink. Seeing that it did not change it at all, it really makes me feel that we have a very opaque ink. This does not care what paper you're going to write on. You're going to get this very dark teal that really is distinctive on the page. I don't know that I've seen a dark teal like this. I feel like it's a fairly unique color, and that's, at this point, coming across what feels like a unique tone and color, rare, and I'm loving it. Looking at the back of the page, you see some of that Chihuahua aggressiveness as it's getting very deep in. There is no writing on the back of the page. However, it did not bleed through and touch the page underneath. So that little bit of aggressiveness can be held back by just putting it in, a bag and carrying it like a small dog.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather and it does not spread. It does not shade. It does stand out against the quad rule without any kind of a problem, which is the real reason to be looking at this paper. It does a great job. Again, this ink has been such a solid performer. It's one of those that if an ink is this good, the reviews are, really stand a chance of being very boring. I almost have to push for it because it's the exact same all the time, which is a beautiful thing when it's that boring. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue our notes back here.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more teal or turquoise inks. Here is Three Oysters Hanul. Here is Ackerman, their number 11. Here is Diamine Turquoise. Here is Robert Oster Aqua. All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. Now, this paper is known to lighten up the tone that we tend to get from inks. That is not the case here. It does not feather, does not spread, does not break up on the lines. It didn't do it on the Rhodia. It's not doing it here. This is a strong, opaque ink, really holds its tone, does amazing things. If you're a student and you use this ink, let me know. You deserve some bonus points. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue those happy lab notes back here.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page. Here is Robert Oster Orange Zest. Here is Diamine Majestic Purple. Here is Diamine Green Black. Here is Noodler's Radler Red Eel. The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here we're seeing the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather. It does not spread. I know this is copy paper. I'm going to say that again. It does not feather and it does not spread. It doesn't shade. This does as well here as it has on every paper. This ink is a perfect ink for this paper. Looking at the back of the page, you see that it does get a bit deep into the page, means you cannot write back here. However, it does not bleed through touching the page underneath.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
Now, this Hero 7045 does have a very wet, fine nib. So it tends to go ahead and get some darker tones out of an ink. And it really did here, being very consistent across all the pages and not really shading at all. So it did make me wonder about trying it with a dry medium nib off camera, which is what I did. And it lightened it only a little bit. Really made very little difference. This is such a strong, consistent ink that I don't think it matters what pen you put it in. You can really just go with dealer's choice. Ink it up, enjoy, and celebrate the win that is this great ink.